This is the most discussed island in the world today.
Taiwan.
Here they do what your smartphone, computer, tablet and a bunch of other gadgets that each of you uses every day cannot live without. The most powerful and modern microprocessors, the main companies of the world buy right here, in Taiwan. But another detail is much more important. Look at this Taiwan Strait. 80% of all trade on the planet passes through this place. But to whom does it belong, to small Taiwan or to its big neighbor, China? Beijing believes that both the strait and the island itself are their property, and for 70 years they have been making plans to return and control all this territory. But how did it happen that Taiwan separated from China? Why does the US need this island? And why does China want so badly, but so far does not dare to attack Taiwan and take it for itself? My name is Fred Maximoff. This is case 6913. Nowadays. Republic of China Taiwan. I know that you watch this video all over the world, and no matter where you are, the brains of your smartphone or other device from which you launch this video are most likely made in Taiwan, because it is there that the world's largest factory is located, which produces half of all microcircuits in the world. That is, hundreds of countries are buying something very necessary, important, and at the same time Taiwanese. By the way, the largest buyers of Taiwanese microcircuits are China, the USA, Singapore, Japan, Germany and South Korea, and these are the main economies of the world. But at the same time, none of them officially recognizes such a state as Taiwan. And only 14 brave countries, the names of which some of you most likely hear for the first time, recognize the independence of Taiwan. But everyone recognizes China, which considers Taiwan its territory, and all this is enshrined in their constitution. But pay attention to the fact that the Taiwanese themselves at the international level already call their country the Republic of China, and already it is written in their constitution that they claim all this vast territory of China. And such a mutual territorial rubbish in fact happens due to two events. The first is when two different and hostile states arise both on the island and on the mainland. And now let's briefly dive into the events of the first half of the 20th century. At that time, there was a civil war in the vast territory of China for 22 years, from 1927 to 1950. Who and with whom then fought? Well, as it was accepted in the 20th century, on the one hand the communists, on the other the nationalists. Some have the main historical face of Mao Zedong, others have Chiang Kai-shek. As a result, Mao won the war and created the Communist People's Republic of China. And today it is this republic that is commonly named China all over the world. And Chiang Kai-shek lost the war, and so that the victors of the communists would not take his life, he and 2 million of his supporters crossed the strait and ended up on the island of Taiwan. There Chiang Kai-shek created his own state, which will never be named Taiwan. But why? Because the official name of Taiwan is the Republic of China and nothing else. It was this republic, and not this new communist Big China, that was initially recognized by the UN countries, and not just recognized. The Taiwanese were permanent members of the Security Council, and there are only 5 such permanent members in the world to this day. These are the USA, Russia, France, Great Britain and China, well in the sense of Taiwan. But on October 25, 1971, at the UN headquarters in New York, they decided that this is a state with such a flag, which is named the Republic of China, which for 26 years they sat in our Security Council. They were considered one of the winners in World War II and were named China is no longer China for us. And now China, these guys with a red flag, with whom our UN troops actually fought in Korea, now they will be permanent members of the Security Council. Welcome to the headquarters of the shoe changer. Here is a visual illustration especially for you. How many countries in 1949 recognized Taiwan and how many China? Now look how things have changed in 70 years. Everyone is now friends with China and virtually no one has official diplomacy with Taiwan. But why is this happening? Well, firstly, China today is the second economy in the world, and in terms of its status and influence, Beijing puts forward a simple demand to everyone: if you recognize Taiwan, then you do not recognize us. And who can afford not to recognize China and quarrel with it? As a result, everyone pretends that Taiwan does not exist as a separate independent state. But in fact, Taiwan is. And that is why Taiwan tries to speak loudly about itself. For example, in 2003, the Taipei 101 skyscraper, the tallest building in the world, was built on the island at that time, and various interesting events constantly take place around this building. Either Spider-Man Alan Robert climbed on it, then Felix Baumgartner jumped off it. Inside, every year international races are held up the stairs to the 91st floor. And even despite the fact that today Taipei 101 is no longer among the 10 tallest skyscrapers in the world, outwardly it is one of the most memorable and beautiful high-rise buildings. By the way, if you suddenly want to look at this skyscraper and even visit Taiwan in person, then I recommend using the offer from our partner Get Your Guide. The Get Your Guide team of more than 500 tourism experts selects the most interesting excursions and activities. Namely entrance tickets for the main attractions without a queue, walking tours organized by local guides, gastronomic excursions, as well as unique authors offers from the Get Your Guide team in Taiwan. In general, if you are interested, then go to the site using the link in the info box under the video. Now back to Taiwan. Why is this republic either recognized or not recognized? In this regard, the guys from the USA have the most obvious position. It is they who first pump money and weapons into the regime of Chiang Kai-shek, simply because Taiwan is an ideal place to create political and military hemorrhoids right under the belly of communist China, or as they say among politicians, not hemorrhoids but a counterbalance.
His fervent dream, his compelling mission, is the defeat of communism on the China mainland.
But after that the United States is moving closer to this communist China. But for what? The answer is simple. This was done in order to create a counterbalance to the Soviet Union as well. Now follow the chronology. October 1970, President Nixon, in an interview with the British newspaper, The Times, said that he dreamed of going to China. In July 1971, National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger fulfilled the boss's dream and went to this China himself. But he went there unofficially, through Pakistan. The purpose of the visit was negotiations.
To open the door for more normal relations between our two countries.
But at the same time, in October 1971, the U.S. representative to the UN voted against replacing Taiwan with mainland China. In fact, at that moment, the U.S. voice in this matter was not decisive, so for the sake of formality it was possible to support Taiwan. Indeed, already in February 1972, President Nixon in Beijing shook hands with Mao Zedong, and on January 1, 1979, already under Deng Xiaoping, the United States officially recognized mainland China. Nothing personal, just business. What about business? We will have to deal with it later. But first let's go back to Taiwan for a bit. It is now there that American companies such as Apple and Intel are by the most complex and expensive semiconductors in the world. In the middle of the last century none of this existed yet, no companies, no semiconductors. But there was cheap Taiwanese labor, namely yesterday's peasants with whom it was very profitable to work. So, at first they made clothes, churned out toys for the entire Western progressive society, but later they began to collect Japanese and American consumer electronics. The only problem was that there were only about 15 million workers in Taiwan. This is too little for a global factory. At the same time, there are at least 1 billion workers in China. From this we can conclude that the rapprochement with Beijing is not only due to the Cold War of the USSR, but also because of this story about big money and big production. The result is the following situation. The United States officially stopped recognizing Taiwan, but at the same time did not stop supporting it with weapons and investments. And now this man appears in our story today. He is the perfect historical character. He is connected to both Taiwan and the United States. His name is Morris Chang, and believe me, this character is the level of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Because he is the one who founded Taiwan's semiconductor industry. And it is he who is destined to turn the island into a global factory. Not just a junk factory, but a goldmine factory of the 21st century, chips. Chiang was born in China in 1931. And while Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, Chiang fled to the United States. There he first studied at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At the moment it is one of the coolest technical universities in the world. But much more important is where Morris Chang ended up next. It was Texas Instruments. They created the first best-selling gadget of the 20th century, the Regency TR-1 pocket transistor radio, and in fact, the modern digital revolution begins with it and transistors. In 1958, Chang began working there as a simple developer, but in 25 years he rose to vice president and naturally thoroughly studied not only how chips are made, but also acquired connections with all the heads of high-tech companies in the United States and the world. And already in 1985, the Prime Minister of the no longer recognized Taiwan invited Morris to move to the island and head the Research Institute of Industrial Technology. During these years, as you remember, Taiwan was still the world's spare parts factory. But it couldn't go on like this. After all, across the strait China has already begun to accelerate with an unlimited number of cheap labor. That is, it became quite obvious that if Taiwan does not change anything, it will lose the competition in the end. At the same time, the government of Taiwan decided to invest in the minds of citizens. Chang has launched dozens of startups with government funding. The goal of these projects is the same, to create and produce what he has worked with all his life, namely integrated circuits and chipsets. One of these startups, named Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or simply TSMC, Chang Morris led personally. And today, TSMC is a place where almost everyone buys chips: Sony, Microsoft, Qualcomm, Nvidia, AMD, Apple, and partly Intel. But TSMC is not the only child of the revolution that happened in Taiwan in the late 80s. In 1987, Acer opened a division to develop and manufacture its own chipsets. In 1988, Transcend was founded. Today, each of you probably held their flash drives in your hands. In 1989, Asus began to produce the first motherboards. These days there is also the Taiwanese company HTC, the manufacturer of AOC monitors. And also 40% of all mobile chips for smartphones in the world are stamped by the Taiwanese company MediaTek. I'm not just listing all of this. It was high technology that brought wealth and prosperity to Taiwan, and many of the local companies that I named have become clear leaders in their fields. For example, 60% of the global automotive industry depends on TSMC. Now answer the question yourself. Why is Taiwan so important to China and the US at the same time? If Beijing gets all this production capacity, China will be able to dictate any conditions to the world of the future. After all, the world economy now depends not only on oil, but also on microprocessors. And the United States is the main consumer of these technologies, and it will not be possible to refuse them so easily. Microprocessors are not oil that can be replaced from Russian to Saudi, from Iranian to Venezuelan, and so on. There are critically few mass producers of modern chips in the world. Or rather, there are only two of them. These are TSMC and Samsung. And growing such chips is really long. Such work takes many months. But you remember at the beginning I said that it is not only about semiconductors. Here it is, the Taiwan Sea Strait. This is the main route for all ships that sail from the countries of East Asia, namely Japan, South Korea, and China to the west. And energy carriers, oil and liquefied gas, come in the opposite direction through the same strait. The Taiwan Strait is an international waterway open to all. In the same place, by the way, American warships regularly pass by. Now imagine if China takes back Taiwan. In fact, Taiwan's current status is best described by General MacArthur's words in 1945, "Taiwan is an unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of East Asia." Later, he added that if the situation is not taken advantage of and the government of Taiwan is not assisted with weapons, then the U.S. line of defense against the communist threat will pass along the beaches of California. The United States, of course, took advantage of the situation, and now the line of defense runs along the beaches of China, and not California. But if you think logically, today no one is ready for a war for Taiwan, neither the United States, nor even China. From a military point of view, landing on an island full of American weapons would be a huge loss of life for China. However, economic reasons are much more important. For example, China's trade with the United States over the past year is $720 billion. About the same volume China trades with Europe. If you add these two amounts, then almost $1.5 trillion are at stake. No one in the world has such numbers anymore. It is clear that at the slightest attempt to start a war, all trade relations will go to hell and cover the planet with a global world crisis. Plus the Taiwan Strait is 80% of world trade. But if you move a little to the west, then there is another interesting strait, Malacca. It is a strait between Indonesia, Malaysia and Singapore. And all the world's trade also goes through these waters. True, this strait is already completely controlled by the US Navy. So any attempt to impose your own rules in one place will automatically lead to a mirror answer in another. And one more important point, no matter how much the number of Chinese patents has grown in recent years, the country still lives by borrowing American, European and Japanese high technologies. Of course, China understands that invading Taiwan will result in the loss of access to these technologies. That is why American intelligence reports every time that China, if it is preparing for war, is not now but in the 27th, 30th, or even in the 50th year. After all, there are these 2 points on the map, Hong Kong and Macau. Today these are officially recognized Chinese territories, and in order to get them back from the British and the Portuguese, Beijing did not fight anyone at all. They simply waited and politically pressed. As a result, these territories themselves fell into the hands of China. By the way, China offered Taiwan the same scheme as with Hong Kong. That is, to be part of a great power as an autonomy with its own currency and laws. But Taiwan too is not blind to see how China eventually tightened the screws on Hong Kong, and how after some time, protests are suppressed there. It is unlikely that anyone in Taiwan will agree to such a sweet adventure, one country, two systems, one of which will be absorbed by the other later. Most likely, China will act as usual, just wait a long time, and the US will continue to use the island as an unsinkable aircraft carrier to influence China. I recommend you watch this exciting story too.